today's a really good jumping off point. I think lots of businesses are going to be struggling with what's coming down the pipe from a legislation perspective. There's a clear direction of travel from the government, which all makes a great catalyst for why right now. But more broadly speaking, I think this opportunity has been floating around for quite a long time now, and hopefully this might be the nudge some businesses need, a little push that they need to really take advantage of it. Up until now, sort of we've had different silos and operating systems and little different types of operating models for different workers here and there, freelancers, contractors, people on FTCs, PAYE, going for umbrella. It's a real opportunity to start consolidating that view, bringing it into scope and getting a bit more organised about it all, a bit more strategic. I think that's when we talk about them now, I think it's that catalyst of the legislation, but more broadly speaking, there's been a pretty compelling case for this stuff for a while, but maybe this is the nudge people need.
It is, and probably for the benefit, they're taking a bit of a step back. We're talking really about the flexible workforce and some of the changes which are coming in the new legislation that's been introduced by the government. So we have a raft of changes coming, some landing as early as April 2026. But looking into the future, we've got a roadmap of changes and also a charter under the new Fair Work Agency, which is very clear around what the government is looking to achieve through consolidation of several different departments, right, really empowering the government to be able to have more control and forcing businesses openly to have more visibility and transparency and more ownership into their flexible workforce. But perhaps let's start with talking about what is a flexible workforce, because there's lots of different terminology out there. We hear the word contingent quite a lot, which is quite a US-centric term. We hear extended workforce, the hidden workforce. Who's included in an extended workforce?
So to the extent that I don't want to be on the hook for the dictionary definition of all this stuff, let me say the nature of people is that it's quite hard to define them. I think one of my first bugbears here is I work in the contingent workforce space, and I hate the phrase contingent workforce because it conjures up this image of this contingency plan, like, oh no, something bad's happened, we need to do this, or and there's an emergency, let's bring a worker in. Like, I think that that terminology isn't very helpful when you're trying to persuade people to be proactive and strategic. So it falls under that umbrella, although I'm not particularly happy about it. When we talk about different sections or segments within the workforce, I think about it in terms of high-skilled freelancers tend to be people you bring in to move the needle in something along the lines of innovation or something creative, something that's really going to increase productivity, something that's not just augmentation of your typical capabilities. So I tend to put that more in the sort of contractor category. We can talk about how their operating models work, aside away from what their deliverables are. But I always think of a high-skilled freelancer as someone who's going to come in and really going to move the needle. They're going to drive growth or initiatives and do something where they're bringing skills into the business. Does that make sense? And then from a contractor perspective, it's augmentation. So it's augmenting those capabilities that your business already has. So it might be a resource shortfall, or Jeff's on paternity leave, or Sally's gone on holiday, that kind of thing. Or it might be one an extra client.
Shift. Yeah, or like a seasonal shift. I think we see like agency workers, right? Really like manufacturing companies, agency workers coming to manage those fluxes, right? When we need to get a lot of product out the door, that type of flexibility is brought often by agency workers. And I think when we're talking about a flexible workforce, we're talking about all of these types of folks, whether it's independent 100%. Contractors bringing specialist skills, whether it's consultants, whether or not it's agency work, even 0 hours contracts and folks working in that gig economy. Are also included in this flexible. It is a positive melting pot, to be fair, of different types of workers engaging with work in lots of different ways, which helps businesses at the end of the day be more flexible and be more agile, really, and competitive at the end of the day.
100%. And I've run audits before for organisations that have these categories and are very rigid categories. And as I said at the start of all of this, like putting people into categories is always going to prove difficult. But the things you uncover when you run an audit for an organisation of what they just bunch as contingent or external, as you say, it might be someone from a massive consultancy all the way through to a service provider that's coming through to like clean the offices at night. the spectrum of deliverables is as wide as it could be, like in any part of the workforce, and the engagement models can also be incredibly diverse, from people operating as PSCs and limited companies all the way through an umbrella or on a fixed term contract directly with the organisation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's not just around the sort of work someone's doing, how they're engaged, or even indeed the contract of employment or contract for services, etc., that they're underpinned by, right? It can also be down to working practices, which is probably the bite on IR35 when it first came in. Was it really came down to the working practice, the day-to-day? Does that person have autonomy? Can they make their own decisions? You know, those types of things became really, really key. But the issue around classification and putting people into categories, if you like, whilst I don't like it myself, is necessary to some degree in order to simplify the landscape so that companies can get on the right side of compliance, right, and understand how to engage, and not just engage, but also manage and work with these folks in compliantly, in line with local legislation, and not just local legislation, but changing local legislation, which can often change without folks being very prepared, right?
We've seen that before. Yeah, absolutely. Certainly people have, I think that knowledge around how we engage different types of engagement models is like a high tier knowledge that often businesses don't have in-house. They see it just as resource coming in, and the idea of we're bringing them in, they're classified like this, so we have to treat them like that, is quite a rare set of expertise in an organisation. I think until IR35 was relaunched in the private sector, there wasn't much sort of scope or bandwidth put towards that way of thinking. It was very much bring a person in, do a job. Have they been paid? Great. That's been a successful engagement. We've all had to adjust how we think about it.
Yeah, well, I think we'll come back to that. But one of the key challenges, I think, when you've got legislation changing and those changes on the horizon and getting prepared, is understanding who does what, right? Contingent labour, as you put it, flexible labour, extended workforce as a terminology I tend to use. Just kind of, I tend to think about the iceberg, right? What we can see above the line, what we see below the line is our hidden workforce, who are all contributing in really different ways to business success. Yeah. But at the end of the day, when it comes to a legislation change, you know, it's not, you know, we don't switch it on like a light. There's a few things that need to change in the background. Contracts need to change, working behaviours need to change potentially, education needs to be in place, policy needs to, internal policy also needs to be brought in and updated. So there's lots of different things which have to happen along that pipeline. And often it's not managed by one department, although when we talk about the extended workforce, quite often we see it sitting under procurement as the owner, and that's really because of where it came from, right? At the end of the day, it was largely seen as a commodity historically. But what's your view for why that is changing? I know that I've always wanted to work differently, and now obviously run my own business, which has allowed me to work differently. But I have done all my life, and one of the reasons that I'm involved in this industry is to ensure that everyone can engage with work in a way that suits them in the lifestyle that they want to have. And we're seeing that more and more, I think, with the new Gen Z, right, coming through. Our new talent that's needed to keep business active and competitive wants to work differently, sees work differently.
Yeah, 100%. That commodity piece is bang on. It used to be a fringe case. It was almost bringing in a service to just be delivered. And that's how people used to work. We saw them as it wasn't really in scope for anyone. That's probably why I ended up with procurement. It didn't belong to HR, it didn't belong to talent acquisition, it didn't belong to any sort of strategic body, that's for sure. So I can see why it used to be like that. I think the change is coming because of the acceleration in the workforce moving towards those models. So organisations don't really have the option anymore of treating them as this fringe case that's out of scope and it will all come out in the wash. As the workforce decides more and more that actually independent working models might be for me, businesses will have to adapt to that change because the global workforce will change around them. This isn't a strategic decision. This is dealing with something that's almost inevitable, right? The data points towards younger people, as you said, Gen Z are much more likely to be interested in going into independent work, but earlier. You know, traditionally freelancing was something that you might think about in your 50s, and now it might be you start as an independent worker. They also have the idea of sort of side hustles baked into their career trajectories. Lots of young people already have their own business. They're either working through social media, or they're creating products, or they have a business plan in mind. Like, we're seeing much more entrepreneurialism much younger in our workforce, and that will all have an effect. And if anyone has Gen Alpha in their family and they've sort of got a 12, 13-year-old at home, if they want to learn how to become a computer programmer, they're doing it on TikTok right now, or they're going on YouTube and doing a university course. Like, the velocity here is only going in one direction. And I think the workforce in 20 years is going to look vastly different to where we are today. We can talk about the factors behind that. I think you could probably speculate as to how a Gen Alpha would look at a traditional career path and think, is that for me? High fees at university? Am I actually going to get loyalty and security from one organization? Will I get great salary increases that beat inflation? Like, the answer to all those questions is probably no. And so
the side hustle thing can be beneficial because, again, coming back to my own experience, right, I had many side hustles honestly alongside my main job, and they were all great learning experiences, and they're all things that I can bring, right, that add into my skill set. And again, when I engage with work now, it's more about what's my client's problem? How can I help solve for it? What skills and openly partners, right, do I need around the table to be able to help a customer and move them along? But going back to perhaps some of the legislation changes that we can see coming out, I mentioned the Fair Work Agency, of course, launching next year with a very clear charter of what that could look like. And, all of these things really require transparency into your extended workforce. What perhaps are some of the challenges around that? I see it from the side of certainly of enterprise global customers, that the transparency question is hard, right? You could have all of the data around your existing extended workforce might be held in supply systems all over the place. How do you get your hands on that? How do you consolidate? How do you make sense of it? But there's also the other end of the spectrum as well, of startups, right? Making sure you get the right things in place first. Much easier to start from a blank sheet of paper to some degree. So, rather than thinking about its permanent workforce and extended workforce, it's actually permanent workforce, and here's all the other different types of work. That melting pot breaks down into those categories. And that might be a nice way for startups to be thinking about their workforce from day one, understanding the differences in those classifications and what that means for how they engage and what sort of work they connect these folks to as well within their own organizations.
Yeah, it's definitely something we encourage at Freelancer, because startups traditionally have a bit of a reputation for, as soon as budget is unlocked, making some quite outlandish hires. That's a trope for a reason, and it's because it happens. People will go, great, the budget's been unlocked, let's hire someone from a massive global competitor to really be our marquee signing, if you will. And I would always encourage startups and scale-ups to think about output first, productivity first. What are the company goals, rather than bringing in a sort of Leo Messi sort of level player into a really small team. So they should, I would always encourage them to certainly think about it in those terms. You mentioned more
choice now, honestly, as well. I mean, one thing that I'd say, and I've been working in this space, right, for the last 12 years, and before that, I worked in strategic PMO builds. I like bringing things that seem disparate together, right, and getting them working and functioning well together. And I think that's a sweet spot now in terms of the extended workforce, because actually the answer is there of course is not one owner, and there is not one owner of the permanent workforce either, right? We all touch it in lots of different ways. It's just that traditional business functions look through their own lens. Technology now enables us to connect people better, to build empathy between those functions, so that actually we can get more morphing and working as one.